Katrin, it's really going to be good to hear a real life scenario of hope in the face of death. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about this background of who is it that you lost?
So my dad died almost 20 years ago now, which sounds crazy. So yeah, it was 2003, and he was 52 and I was 18. So I just was starting in college.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about your dad?
Yeah, so dad was short and bald and wore glasses and had a quirky sense of humour. I think, the thing that characterised him the most was probably that he was a man who lived by his claims. So I would really describe him as somebody who loved God and wanted to live a life that followed him. So what that looked like when we were growing up, we knew when Dad was reading his Bible and praying every day, like he'd go and sit at his bureau and be quiet for a certain amount of time every day. And not that we went to disturb him, but we just knew that there was something special about that, and it was daily. It wasn't, we went to church and but it was kind of like that was just an aspect of this daily living that he did. The way that Mum and Dad parented us was something that they got from the Bible, because they used that to really guide them through life. So really that was very noticeable for me, even as a child, to know that he was a Christian, but that meant an awful lot more than just going to church and following a tradition. Like, it was something that affected his life every day.
So when he and the whole family went through this time, what did you learn about your dad through that time?
So I think I learned a lot about his love for us as children, and for his love for his God, like who, he would talk to you about Jesus and know that he was his Lord. So I suppose what I mean, his love for us, and I think now that I'm a parent, I probably understand a little bit more of what that means as kind of years have gone on, but he loved us really well and protected us well and wanted to love us through this illness. So he had cancer, and he had it for a while, and then he had treatment and was in remission, and then it came back aggressively, and then weeks later he had died. So and my sister and I were teenagers, so we were still kind of young and naive, but I think, it was just actually really lovely to see a father's love for his children in the middle of an illness, and he knew a lot sooner than we did that was going to end in death. So I really appreciate now his fatherly love, but I think his honestly, his hope in the face of death, it really was that he endured a lot physically, but I think in terms of his foundation, it was really obvious to me as a teenager. It was so unwavering, that he knew that he had confidence that he was going to be with Jesus forever, and that his pain was temporary, and that there was hope, and there was a reason, and there was goodness even in this really rubbish situation. Death is not natural, it's not pleasant, and I think we don't like thinking about it, we don't like talking about it, because it's grievous, and I think it's good that we grieve, because it's not it's not normal, and yeah, it was never part of God's intended plan for the world. So I think it's right that, you know, we hold that on one side, but actually, yeah, it was amazing for me to see Dad and how his life and his death matched up, you know. He really, like, he lived for Christ. He knew what it meant to be forgiven of his sins and to live in the light of that when he was here, but also he knew that that would affect his whole eternity. Yeah, so I mean, it's a funny thing to say that somebody died well, but I think he did, because he just always had his eyes fixed on that hope of heaven, and it wasn't an empty hope, you know, it was based on something solid. Yeah, so on his gravestone is written a verse from Philippians, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And that really did characterize his life and his death, you know, that he really did live for Christ. And I think that sounds really obscure to somebody who doesn't know Jesus. And I think for a long time I kind of grappled with, what does it really mean to know Jesus? Because he's a figure in history, he's a man in the Bible, but actually, yeah, I think Dad probably showed me a lot of what that really looked like, to have a living relationship with a living God. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask, like, in seeing your dad so confidently enter into this, well, like you said, he knew before you did in a way, or he was ready, and lived for Christ and died for Christ. And in seeing that and experiencing that alongside and seeing him, how did that affect you as an 18-year-old?
Yeah, so I definitely, like, you know, we grew up going to church every week on a Sunday, and like I could have told you all the kind of, you know, the key pillars of the Christian faith, and I could have told you all the right answers, but I didn't really know where I was at. And like, you know, Dad had this certain sure hope of heaven, but if you'd have asked me at that point, where do you think you're going when you die, I wouldn't have been able to say, oh, I'm definitely going to heaven. So in those kind of last weeks, you know, Dad brought us in one by one to kind of have, I guess, what he knew was like the final big chat, whilst he was still, you know, able enough to do that. And he said to me, like, you know, the thing that would make me the happiest in the world is to know that you had assurance of, you know, salvation, that you know where you are with Jesus. And I was like, yeah, Dad, I'm really trying. And I think that was really where I was at, that I was trying really hard to understand, and I was trying really hard to live a good life and to do what I knew was right, but actually that's not what the gospel is at all. And that was the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, that like when Jesus invites us to come, he really just asks us to bring us his sin, bring him our sin, and not our good works, because they're like filthy rags, he says, you know. And actually, like, that's why he went to die, because we can't earn our place before God. So yeah, it had a deep impact on me in that sense of maybe that's realization of where I was actually at with God, and how I really had misunderstood the heart of what a life, fullness of life, following Jesus really looked like. Like, it's not about rules, it's not about doing the right thing, it's about understanding forgiveness of sin, and knowing that I can do nothing before a God who is holy and perfect, but say sorry and trust him, and then accept that life and know that like everything he gives us is undeserved but absolutely amazing. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey to start thinking like, yeah, what am I going to do with this myself, do you know? And to start reading the Bible for myself, which is massive, because I think that really was where I was going to find the answers, do you know? Like, yeah, if you want to get to know a person, you need to spend time with them. And I think it had really struck me that I'd never spent time with Jesus, and how I was going to do that was read his word to see who he is and what he's done. And so that was cool, because, yeah, having read the Bible for 18 years, I realised I hadn't really read it at all. So
like your dad in his study.
Yeah, and I loved that kind of journey of exploration. Like, I was really hungry for it, you know. I could have read the Bible and listened to people talking about what it meant for every day of the week. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing to like know you now and see, you know, like to think of that time and that like how intensive that time was and important.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely part of who you are now. And yeah, I'm just thinking about this in facing death, and actually like having your dad go, and seeing that, and I kind of wanted to ask like what was like difficult about that when it finally happened, and then how did you face it? Like, did you find hope? Like how did you get through that?
You might have to remind me of the question again, but I think, so I think it was really important to be realistic about what was happening. So it is a really hard thing to talk about. Like, it's a hard topic because most of us have encountered death in some way, and if we haven't, we will. And it's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but it is the reality of living in this imperfect world, and it's not what God intended. And I think where that comes from is that, like, we can't deceive ourselves, we can't kid ourselves into thinking that death isn't coming. The Bible talks about Satan being a deceiver, and like he's the master liar, you know. So I just think like we're doing ourselves a real disservice if we don't take time to think about it. And for a long time, like in my simplistic mind, I was kind of like, okay, either it's true or it's not, and like heaven is real or it's not. And if it's not real and I've believed it here and now, then I haven't really lost anything apart from maybe a few experiences, you know, that I've chosen not to do by living as a Christian. If it is real and I've chosen to ignore it on earth, that is an eternity of regret and pain and in my simple mind, kind of that was the ultimatum. But yeah, I do think we need to think about it, and the Bible gives us a real platform to be able to do that. And like, there's no question or heartache that's too big to bring to Jesus, and he invites us into that. And like what we looked at, you know, he talks about death and he walks with us through death, and then he eventually does go to death himself, you know. So yeah, I think it's the perfect invitation for us to go to for that. How did I deal with it at the time? Like, it was very sad, you know, and there are so many times when I wish Dad was still here, because, you know, I would have loved him to meet my husband and my children, and he never did. And, you know, that's a really sad thing. And it was heartbreaking to see my mum, you know, lose her life partner, and all these letters flooded into the hospital of people who had met him during his life and wanted to say goodbye, and that was very touching, you know, all those things. And seeing somebody physically waste away is horrible, you know. So those things are hard, and it's a hard thing to kind of deal with as an 18-year-old when you don't really know who you are. But I think knowing that body that I saw wasting away was just a shell, and actually it was like he was passing on to be with Jesus, who was going to give him a new body, and he was going to be, actually in the most glorious place, with the most glorious person for the rest of time. And seeing Dad's faith in that was massive, to know that he, not that of course he didn't invite death, like, the physical suffering was hard for him and all that stuff, but it's a massive game changer in terms of dealing with death, when and it doesn't get rid of the grief. I think that grief is good because it reminds us that the world isn't as it should be, but I think the hope that Jesus offers, to be with him forever, like that is just the best hope that life can give.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. Yeah. Anything else?
I could
all
talk
I was
all day,
gonna
but
ask.
that's fine.
No, I so appreciate that the grieving is right because it's not right.
Yeah.
And we see that as Jesus wept, that this isn't okay, but that he has an end result that we can believe in.
Yeah. And I think, I guess that's the big thing, that, it does pain me a little bit when people just think, you can bury your head in the sand and it'll be fine, because it's a big thing to deal with, and we don't have to walk through that alone. I think, Jesus became a man and lived a life and died a death in order that we could be with him forever, and we don't need to ask those questions by ourselves, and we don't need to face death by ourselves, and we don't need to face the prospect of eternity by ourselves. Jesus goes with us through all of that, and that's when we find our ultimate purpose, I think, with him.
Thank you, Katrin.
You're welcome.